ES6 added some nice support for easily defining object literals. If we look at this function here, this function is an arrow function. It takes in three variables, name, age, and gender, and it's going to return an object. And the object is going to have a series of key value pairs where the key is the name, age, and gender, and the values are the passed in variable names, the passed in names, age, and gender. So if you look in the console, you can see what this currently does. We did the create person, we pass in a name, age, and gender, and you can see in the console the object is name and Zodiac Hasbro, age 56, gender male. So you can see there's some repetition. We're repeating name, name, age, gender, gender. Now the first name is the key and the second name is the value, but there's a way to just make this simpler. If you know that you want to create an object with where the key is the name of the variable and the value is the value of the variable, there's an easier way to do it. We can actually delete this whole thing here, and this is how we're going to do it. We'll just do name, age, gender. JavaScript knows that it's going to return this object and it's going to have three key value pairs, the name, age, and gender. So if I reload this, you'll see in the console it looks exactly the same because this code does the same thing that the previous code did. An object can contain a function. This is the long way to put a function within an object, but there is a simpler way. We have the setGear function, but instead of using the function keyword and this colon, we can just delete all that. And now this is the new way. If I load this again, you'll see 3 in the console, just like it was before, because we've been able to set the gear using that function. ES6 provides a syntax to help create objects using the class keyword. So here's the older way to create an object. It's with the new keyword. We can instantiate an object using this new keyword, and we're instantiating the space shuttle object. We have to have this constructor function up here. So we use this to construct the object where we pass in the target planet, Jupiter, and we set the target planet to this dot target planet. Once we create the new object like this, that allows us to do Zeus.targetPlanet. So Zeus.targetPlanet, which we set to Jupiter. So in the console, you can see Jupiter. The class syntax replaces the constructor function creation. So I'm going to delete that. We're going to use the class syntax. So I'll do class space shuttle. And then we have the curly brace here. And so inside here, we have a constructor. So I'll do constructor target planet. And then that's all. We just have to put in the curly brace. And this works exactly the same as before, using the class keyword and this constructor. So down here, we are going to do the same thing for a vegetable class. So for the vegetable class, we'll have class vegetable, and we're going to have a constructor with the name. This dot name equals name. So now that we have this, we can set this vegetable to make class, which will return a vegetable class that's up here. And then when we do new vegetable and passing carrot, this carrot will go into here and it'll get set as this dot name. So when we console.log carrot.name, we should get carrot. With a class object, you often want to obtain values from the object and set a value of a property within an object. These are often called getters and setters. So in this class object, we have the constructor, which we already talked about. We also have a getter and setter to get and set the writer. So we can get the writer and we can set the writer. Getter functions are meant to simply return or get the value of an object's private variable to the user without the user directly accessing the private variable. So the private variable is this underscore author that gets set when you construct the object. And then when we do get writer, it's going to return this dot underscore author. So you never actually interact directly with this variable, but it's going to get the writer, which is the author here. And when you're setting it, it's the same. So you're never interacting with the underscore author, but you can set that with the writer setter. This change could invoke calculations or even overriding the previous value completely. So you can have any number of code lines in this setter to ultimately maybe do different calculations before you set it or calculations before you get the property. So what we're going to do is make our own getter and setter for the thermostat class. We're going to create a thermostat class and we're going to have a getter and setter. So here's the thing about this challenge is that when we construct the class, it's going to accept Fahrenheit temperature, but we're going to create a getter and setter in the class to obtain the temperature in Celsius. So it's going to have to do the calculation right within the class. So let's do that. We're going to do a class of thermostat. And in this class, we need the constructor. So when you first create the thermostat, you're going to pass in a temperature. And remember, this is going to be Fahrenheit. Now, within this constructor, we're going to set a private variable, this dot underscore temp. So the word this just means that this variable is only accessible within this class here. And the underscore temp, whenever you start a variable with an underscore, that's going to generally signify that it's a private variable, that you're not supposed to access it outside of that scope or outside of that class. So we're going to set the temp, and we're not going to just put this underscore temp equals temp, because it's passed in as a Fahrenheit and we want to convert it to Celsius. I just happen to have the equation for Celsius. So it's 5/9 times, and then we're going to do temp minus 32. So now we can create the getter and setter. So for getter, we'll do get temperature, and we're just going to return this dot underscore temp, which now it's in Celsius because we're storing the value in Celsius, even though the thermostat is created in Fahrenheit. So with the setter, it's going to be the same. Set temperature, updated temp, and it's now going to still be in Celsius. So this dot temp equals updated temp. So let's look at the code down here, how we're using it. So the const thermostat equals make class. This make class function is going to return this thermostat object here. And then we're going to do const thermos equals new thermostat. So when you're instantiating an object, you always use the new keyword, new thermostat, that's this, and we're passing in 76. That goes into the constructor, the temp. And so we do this calculation to convert that Fahrenheit to the Celsius in this local variable here. And then let temp equals thermos.temperature. So thermos.temperature is going to use the getter, get temperature, and it's going to return this dot underscore temp. So a key thing to look at is that there are no parentheses after this. So generally, if something is a function, you would see parentheses after the function name, but if it's a variable or property name, it's going to not have parentheses. So getters and setters are accessed similar to properties. And then we can use the setter here, thermos.temperature equals 26, and then it sets it with the updated temperature. And now we can say temp equals thermos.temperature, and if we do a console.log here, we can do that with the temp, and it should have the new temperature. If I load that, 26. In the past, people would use the require function to import functions and code from other files. But now we have import and export. You can export code in one file and then import it in another file. It also allows you to only import certain functions from a file or certain variables. Let me show you how it works. So in this file, we have this capitalized string function where we're passing in the string hello, and we want it to log out the capitalized strings. But right now, it just has an error because there is no capitalized string function in this file. However, in this other file, we do have a capitalized string function. In this string function.js, we have export. This is the export statement I was talking about. And then it's exporting this function. It's actually a variable, capitalized string, that's set to equal a function. This is an arrow function where we pass in a string and then we return the string dot to uppercase. Now, to uppercase is just a string function that makes every letter uppercase. So we can import this in our other file. So let's go back to our other file and I will import. And with the import statement, you're going to use curly braces. And then I'll put capitalize string. And then we have to say what we're importing it from. We want to import it from, and this is where I put the file name. Now, normally you're going to start with a dot slash, which just means the current directory, and I'll type in the file name, string function. Now, the file name has a .js after it, but that's assumed. So you don't have to put .js. You can just put the file name without the extension. So if I run this, you can see hello in all capital letters. It successfully imported this function from the other file, and we used it in this file. I talked a little bit about export in the last lesson, but now I'm going to go into more detail. You export functions and variables from one file so that you can import them into another file. That's how you can reuse different code. So we have this function here. This is a capitalized string function. It actually just capitalizes the first letter of the string and then leaves the rest of the string lowercase. And before I showed you, you can just put export right before here, but we can export a different way. So I'll do export, and then in curly braces, capitalize string. And so now we've just exported this function. And to export a variable like this, we have const foo equals bar, const bar equals foo. To export these variables, you just type in export right before. So now in this file, we're exporting this function and these two variables, and then we could import them into another file. If a file exports multiple different things, you can import each things individually, or you can import everything. So let me show you how you would import everything from a file. It's just import, and then you're going to put an asterisk or a star, and then you're going to put import as, and then you have to create an object to store everything in. So I'm going to import stuff from a file called capitalized strings. So I'm going to call this capitalize strings. So this could really be anything. I'm creating an object with this, and then I'm going to say what I'm importing it from. And then I just put the file name. In this case, it's just going to be capitalize strings. Sometimes you would have to put a dot slash if it's in the same directory there, and then I'll make sure to put a semicolon at the end. So if you're importing everything, you always start off with import star as, and then this can be anything. It can be any object name that you create, and then you're going to put from, and then you put the file name in quotation marks just like that. Before, when I talked about exports, I was talking about named exports. There's also something called an export default. This is a fallback export, and it's often used if you only want to export one thing from a file. So if you, let's say I want this to be my fallback export, I'm just going to only export this one thing from the file. I can just put export default. So now we know that this is just the fallback, though basically just the one thing we're going to export from this file. So we talked about exporting a default export. Now I'm going to show you how to import a default export. It's pretty much the same as before, but there is a slight difference. So we are going to pretend we have a file called math functions that has a default export name subtract. So let me show you how you would import that. So it's going to be import subtract, and we've already reached the difference here. If it's not a default export, you would put curly braces around this. But it is a default export, so we are not going to use curly braces. But we still have to say what it's from. So from math functions. Okay, so that is how you would import a default export.